We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
that's complicated.
In that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Finding Freedom here on the Lions of Liberty Podcast Network. And as I mentioned before last week's show, taking a little pivot in the show topic-wise, focusing more on some different topics that I haven't a lot in the past. Going to be talking about health and wellness and entrepreneurship and a whole bunch of really exciting things and very important things for right now. And today's episode is no different. It kind of mixes a couple of those topics together, talking about the importance of getting good, high-quality, regenerative beef in your diet and accessing that beef, buying it using Bitcoin. Really excited for you guys to hear about this today. I think this is potentially revolutionary and very important for people to hear about. So just want to remind you that you should share this show. And if you don't know, there's two ways to listen to it. And if you're listening to this now, you're listening in one of those two ways. You can listen on the Lions of Liberty Network, or you can listen on the Finding Freedom podcast, which is solo, this show only. So if you want to share the Finding Freedom solo feed, exclusively, that's fine. Maybe, if you're sharing with someone who's not into politics and things like that and philosophy, then maybe you just want to share this solo feed. But, if you want to expose people to the ideas, that we talk about on the other shows on the feed on Mark and Brian's show, then of course share the Lions of Liberty Network feed, and maybe they'll stumble over and listen to a few other podcasts. Up to you which one you want to share, but whichever one you share, we appreciate it here at Lions of Liberty. And please, I just want to remind you guys that on both feeds, whichever one you listen on, please consider, if you haven't, it helps us tremendously, to go and leave a 5-star rating and a nice comment. I haven't talked about this or encouraged you all to do this for a little while, but please, it really does help us with the, especially the Apple podcast algorithms, but you can do it on, many different podcasting apps. So that's all I got for today. I hope you enjoy today's show. All right, we are live here with Dr. Thomas Hemingway. Dr. Hemingway, he is a holistic and integrative medical doctor. He lives and shares his personal and professional philosophy of prevention over prescription. I love that. I wish more doctors were like that. He's passionate about sharing this message of natural health and healing through powerful practices which are simple, doable, and can be life-saving. He has a goal of actually saving 100 million lives by optimizing health and wellness through natural means, which is amazing. He's recently written a book. It's not out yet. It's going to be called PREVENTABLE, 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakeable Health. I think that's coming out maybe this fall or summer. We'll ask about that. And he's also the host of a really good podcast, which I listen to pretty much every episode that he puts out. It's called the Modern Medicine Movement. So definitely check that out. It's on all of the podcast apps and highly recommend. So Thomas, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Oh, thanks, John. Appreciate you having me, man. Super pumped to be here. It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, when we talked, we emailed back and forth. There's a bunch of stuff that I could ask you about from a health standpoint. Every episode that you do on your podcast, you kind of zero in on a certain health concern or issue or certain ailment to treat. But something that I'm passionate about, and my friends call me the gut health guy. I'm always talking about gut health, and I know that your expertise in gut health is levels above mine. You have the health background to back it up, the medical background to to back it up. So I want to talk mostly about that today. But before we get to that topic, if you just for my audience's sake, if you could give some background on yourself, tell them a bit of your story, a little bit of your elevator pitch on what you're all about.
I would love to. I mean, I'm a traditional trained, Western trained medical doctor. I got my MD over 20 years ago. And what's been interesting about that journey is that I, went to UC San Diego, which is a standard top 10 medical school, and they didn't talk much at all about things like gut health. For example, one is just simply because of the times. 20 years ago, nobody was really talking about it. But beyond that, we sort of were trained in this kind of symptom-based, evaluation and treatment, which I think is a reasonable place to start, but I think a lot of times it misses the bigger picture, which is to get to the actual root cause of illness. And so ever since I was a kid, I was always super curious about the human body and about more of a holistic approach to medicine and health and wellness. I've never, been the guy that just jumps to the prescription pad immediately when somebody tells me, oh, I have this problem or that problem. And okay, quick, let me write the prescription really fast because that would get them out of the office quicker or out of the, wherever I may be. I've been kind of a hospital-based physician for almost 20 years, but about a year ago, I stepped away from that role because I saw too many times that people were not really getting the help that they needed. In other words, I think here in the US, I can speak to that because that's where I practiced medicine for the last 2 decades, that we're really, really good at emergency care. And that's kind of been my specialty. I've been an ER doctor, and we're great at treating, accidents, heart attacks, strokes, all these kinds of things in the immediate, several minutes to hours. We have unbelievable, super high quality, state-of-the-art care. But when it comes to managing the most common issues that people have from, diabetes, heart disease, the number one killer worldwide, many people know this, it's heart disease. And we're not making a very big difference despite all of the technology we have, all the information, all of the tools. For example, people are still dying. 1 in 3 deaths in the US is from heart disease, and heart disease is almost entirely preventable. And so I've known this for a while, and it kind of pains me to see people suffer unnecessarily. I feel like they don't all have the information that they need of how to prevent this condition, because heart disease is almost entirely preventable, as is type 2 diabetes, for example, obesity, and most cancer. Most people have no idea, but most cancer is actually preventable. And a couple of the things that can really make the biggest difference tend to be really, really simple things like gut health. Gut health it sounds simple. It's actually a pretty potentially deep topic. We can get into it. Tell me where you want to go with it, and I'll be happy to go there. But it's one of those things that if we really focus on how to get our gut healthy, a lot of other problems just kind of work themselves out. It's one of those really cool kind of common denominators, if you will, that can help us in so many different ways, from blood pressure to blood sugar balance to decreasing inflammation, which is literally at the root of almost every ailment, including heart disease, including cancer, including diabetes. They all have inflammation at their root. And when you get your gut healthy, your inflammation goes away. It's amazing. So I've been passionate about sort of this natural approach for about the last decade, and I've really taken a full pivot in my life where I've stepped away from hospital medicine about a year ago to just focus on this natural, holistic process of helping people prevent disease and get better through mostly non-medical means. So it doesn't mean that I'll never write a prescription. I certainly do write them when necessary, but that's not my knee-jerk first response. I try to attack things from the so-called root cause approach, which oftentimes in medicine we don't do. And I think mostly it's because we don't take the time to do so. It's not that we couldn't, but docs are really pressured to see 20, 30, 40 patients a day, and they just don't have time to really get to the bottom of things. And it's quicker to just reach for the prescription pad, which I just don't feel like is the best long-term approach. And if we look at the data, we can see we're not getting much better. In fact, right now, today, we have 70% of the US population, 70, is overweight or even obese. And it's getting worse and worse every year. And COVID and the pandemic, it's gotten worse because we're all at home. We're super close to our refrigerators and our pantries, and we're snacking all the time. And so we're not making any progress here. in sort of the traditional Western approach. So that's been my mission and my goal, like you mentioned, to save 100 million lives, because there's so much that can be done that I think most people don't really know about. And they don't know how easy it can be to actually get their gut healthy and what a huge difference it can make. And I've seen that in hundreds, if not thousands of people that have been able to come off medication, to feel healthier, to feel more energized, to be clear and focused, kind of lose this kind of brain fog that has been bothering them for sometimes years, and they've done it naturally and simply. And that's sort of the approach I'm taking currently. And it's been amazing.
Yeah, I mean, gut health, fixing my gut health, healing my gut has been something that has helped me tremendously. It's helped me to lose weight, and not only to lose weight, but it's helped me to be able to keep it off in an easy way. It's not crash dieting or having to do calorie restriction and those types of things. But there's so many benefits to it. It's not just about getting your gut healthy to lose weight. It's all of the digestive issues, right, and dealing with IBS and, like you said, inflammation. That's gut health is the root to that, which is the root to so many different diseases. I think the place to start, what I want to start talking about, or ask you about, I should say, is what causes poor gut health? What are some of the biggest factors out there that lead people down this path of having, because some of them are surprising, I think, of having, issues with gut health?
Yeah, let's start there, because if we don't understand sort of what causes a unhealthy gut, in sort of the medical speak, we call that dysbiosis, which just means an imbalance of your bacteria and microbes that live in your gut. So this is super interesting. I got to mention this. We as humans have so many trillion cells, depending on what data you read, it's 30 trillion one day, it's 40 trillion another day, but somewhere in that neighborhood of cells in our body. And in our gut, in our GI tract, from our stomach to our butt, we basically have more than that. We have probably 50 to 100 million bacterial cells. And so we're actually outnumbered by them. But not only that, it's actually super interesting if you consider the amount of genetic material that these microbes have. So mostly it's bacteria, they make up the biggest part, but there's also viruses, there's also fungi, parasites, and things like that. Mostly it's bacteria, and they mostly live in our small and large intestine. And they have about 10 to 100 times more genetic material, or DNA, than we do. So we're actually more them than we are us. So I think, just for starters, we should pay attention, right? Number one, we're outnumbered by them. And number two, there's more information telling not only them, but telling our bodies what to do, because these very bacteria that live in us, that live within us and on us, they actually send signals, for example, to the brain, and they tell us what to crave or what to eat, because they're selfish, right? Their goal is just like, Darwin explained, it's survival of the fittest. They want to survive. And if they want to survive, they're going to tell us what is the food that they like. So if it's the unhealthy bacteria, they will literally send signals to our brain telling us to eat junk food, processed food, all the highly processed flours, grains, carbohydrates, all the stuff that we tend to like, right? Like the chips, the crackers, all of those things. So they are.
I just want to pause. I just want to pause on that for a minute. So you're telling me if you eat a bag of Doritos, those Doritos are going to go into your gut and be broken down, and then those little microbes that are fed by the bad microbes that are fed by those Doritos are going to say, I want more Doritos, and you get those signals to your brain. That's the craving.
Yeah, that's the craving. So it's not, some people, they blame themselves and they go, oh, I just don't have the willpower. I sit down and I can't stop eating. I just eat one after the other. And then pretty soon I turn around and the whole bag is gone. Like, it's not your fault. It's not you being weak. It's not lack of willpower. It's actually the science. These gut microbes literally send signals to your brain to tell you to eat more, because that's how they survive. And beyond that, the folks that are making these, like, they literally have laboratories where they study this stuff. Their goal is to make you crave this stuff. They want you to buy more and more and more, right? Because they sell more product, right? It's the bottom line. And so it's not you being weak. It's actually these gut microbes sending you those signals. And this has been well studied. There's been numerous papers on this, and it's fascinating. I mean, who knew these guys were literally potentially controlling our cravings and our desires, those little microbes that live in our gut? But the converse is also true. So if you eat real food, whole foods, the foods that don't come with what I call the 3 Bs, right? In a box, in a bag, or with a barcode. You're not eating processed foods. You're eating real fruit, real vegetables, real healthy, well-sourced meats. You're eating real food. You will cause the good bacteria to proliferate and grow, and they will send signals saying, hey, why don't you eat more of that broccoli or more of that, Brussels sprouts, or, the grass-fed beef or well-raised chicken or fish or whatever that you eat. They'll make you want to eat more of that too. So it goes both ways. You can have the good cravings from the good bacteria, or those sweets and other cravings from the bad bacteria, and you ultimately get to decide who you feed, right? It's that old analogy. Well, which wolf wins, right? It's the one that gets fed. It's the one that you feed, right? So,
Right.
So that's kind of at the base of it. It's really interesting, that whole signaling process. It's a smart system. They send literally signals to your brain. So it's super cool. I find that so fascinating.
So I've heard, some different things about the effect of antibiotics on gut health, being that it can take something like 9 months or a year to recover from, a single cycle of antibiotics. Is that true? And how does that work? What's happening when you take antibiotics?
Yeah. So what happens is, and it is true, and it does vary. So it varies based upon which antibiotic you are on. There are definitely some that are stronger than others, that are so-called more broad spectrum, for example, and they can literally, take your body 6 to 12 months to recover. Probably the simplest of all antibiotics you could potentially recover from in as little as 6 to 12 weeks. So it could be less than that. But yes, it is absolutely proven that it does take weeks to months to recover from one course of antibiotics. And the sad thing here is that here in the US, and most of us, I think, can appreciate this, right? We've been to our doctor for a cough or a runny nose or a fever or a cold or whatever. And we've often either been offered or given an antibiotic prescription for something that is 90+% of the time a virus. So what that means is the antibiotic that we got doesn't actually treat our virus that we have. And so we're potentially wrecking our gut with an antibiotic that we never needed in the first place. The most conservative estimate, which is actually published on the CDC website, says that we prescribe about 50%, 1 in 2 prescriptions is overkill, is actually unnecessary. And in my experience, it's probably even higher than that. It's probably closer to 60 or often even 70% if you're just talking about like a regular primary care office or an urgent care or something like that, that these prescriptions are literally being handed out when most of the time people don't need them. And so I'm not saying that you shouldn't take an antibiotic if you really need it, because there are absolutely cases where you may be dying of a kidney infection or a blood infection called bacteremia or sepsis, and I will be the first to put you on an antibiotic in that case. But if you have a little bit of a cough, a little bit of a runny nose, a little bit of a sore throat, or even kids that have ear infection, there's plenty of data from even the American Academy of Pediatrics that says that most of these resolve without antibiotics. So why take the risk? So what happens is that when you take an antibiotic, it kills both good and bad. And often it kills so many of the good bacteria in your gut that later smaller populations of the bad bacteria that survive can actually take over. The worst case scenario is something called C. diff colitis, Clostridium difficile. And this is something that's been out in the media. I mean, people literally die from this. It's a bad, bloody diarrhea where you get super sick. And this does happen more and more commonly in the last, I would say, decade than I've ever seen it before. In medical school is more something we just heard about. But because of the overprescription of antibiotics, this happens pretty commonly, and it's really sad. You know what's interesting? One of the few treatments that actually works if you get this really bad colitis from basically being on antibiotics is a stool transplant, a fecal transplant from somebody who's healthy that has a healthy gut flora. So they basically take poop from that person and they give it to the person that got this bad C. diff infection to try to give them good bacteria. So if you don't want to eat somebody else's poop, be a little bit cautious and careful of how you take antibiotics. Ask your doctor, is it absolutely necessary for me to be on antibiotics?
What will they do? Will they put it in capsules and then you swallow it? Or
so there's a lot of different ways. The most effective is they put down a tube down your nose, goes down the back of your throat, and it goes into your stomach. and they basically put the stool through that tube. So you don't have to like taste it or swallow it, but you got to have this nasty tube going through your nose. I don't know if anybody's ever had that in the audience, but these are, I mean, you basically feel like you're gagging all the time. You got this tube that goes down the back of your throat into your stomach called an NG tube, and they put the stool through that. And that's generally how they repopulate the gut. It's a nasty, difficult treatment that you don't want to have to take, but if your life is at risk, well, of course you're going to do it. But that's, the most interesting thing is it can be solved by healthy gut bacteria, which is what we all want in the first place to hopefully avoid this. So yeah, that's one of the top, I call them the gut wreckers, the things that wreck our gut health or our microbiome. And one of the top one is antibiotics. And that's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, that's the one that we hear about, but there's also a lot of other things that folks can get over the counter that you would never even think of that could be harmful. Like say you have a little bit of heartburn or a stomach upset and you start taking these over the counter, purple or pink pills that are all available without a prescription, the so-called antacids or what are called proton pump inhibitors, which is basically everything that ends in a azole, like Protonix is one. There's like omeprazole. There's all of these that are available now over the counter, Prevacid, these kinds of things that literally will change the pH, which is the acid-base balance of the stomach. And that can be harmful to your gut microbes because we evolved to have an acidic pH in the stomach, which is a lower pH so that the bad bacteria can't survive. Like we don't want to have the bad guys survive. And so we have acid in our stomach for a reason. So if we're taking these antacids all the time, it changes that balance, making it more likely for these bad bacteria to survive and cause the very problem we're trying to solve, this dysbiosis or this imbalance of microorganisms. So most people, in fact, most doctors sadly have no idea that these simple, even over-the-counter medications people take for acid problems, heartburn, are actually wrecking their gut almost to the same degree as antibiotics. It's just
it's so crazy to me that the doctors, I mean, I understand, the modern doctor is very busy. They're inundated with patients. They have no time. Do they just not have the time? And I don't want to go off on a side tangent, so we'll try to limit this, but they don't have the time to do this research to learn about this, or what do you think it is? Yeah,
so I would say a lot of it is that, and it's not their fault. I mean, they're very, very busy, and I was like this for years. I mean, I was seeing anywhere between 20 and 50 patients a day, depending on the day. I mean, that's a lot. You're just, cranking through and just trying to get through the day. I mean, you're so exhausted at the end of the day. When do you have time to read all the current research? I mean, there is a CME, continuing education requirement, but if you're not reading the right things from the right sources, you may never even see that. So a lot of it is just they don't have this knowledge. They're not aware of it. And like I said, it's not their fault. They're just so busy. They don't have time to keep up with the literature. In fact, the data shows that most MDs, medical doctors, it takes them about 10 to 15 years to catch up with the newest research. So it's really a slow process. Wow. It's not one that I'm proud of. And unless you do your own due diligence to stay up to date, you're going to miss a lot of this stuff. Because if you're waiting for it to come out through the general sort of pipeline through medical school curricula or through like the American Medical Association, these kinds of things, it usually takes somewhere between 10 and 15 years for the newest, data and research to actually come through those channels. So it's a slow process. You got to get after it and you got to be, on it. And most doctors just don't have the time. They're so exhausted. They work so hard and they just don't take the time to stay up to date. So, yeah.
It's crazy. Okay, so you talked about a fecal transplant, a way if you're in real bad if you're in real bad shape, and I've also heard about it working for different. Maybe we'll talk about the gut-brain axis later, but helping with maybe things like autism or different neurological issues, a fecal transplant, helping with that. So we'll get to that down the road. But for people who are having issues and want to heal their gut, what types of things do you recommend? I know there's people who are in the just only heal your gut by eating food camp. There's people in the supplement camp. There's people in both camps. Where do you fall?
Yeah, so I believe number one, food first. So I always strive to get as much as I can, both nutrient wise, both, gut health wise, which would be like probiotics. You can get them from certain foods, right? Fermented foods. I believe in a food first approach, but then supplementing to fill the gaps, because right now in 2022, most of our food is actually much less nutrient dense than it was 100 years ago. And this is for a lot of reasons. One, our farming techniques have, although some would purport that they're better maybe in supplying larger quantities of food, more corn, more soy, more rice, more wheat. But the ways in which they do it, which is called monocrop agriculture, and stripping the soil, doing all this tilling and things, they're actually raising up, although more in quantity, but way less quality and way less nutritious foods. In other words, the food that we eat nowadays has way less nutrition than it used to 100 years ago. And this has been well known. There was a study that I read as early as 1938 that was studying the soil and the composition of nutrients, things like magnesium, selenium, zinc, these really important nutrients, that they were even noticing a significant decline back in 1938. So here's the thing. Right now, present day, I don't believe we can truly get all the nutrients we need from our food only. I use that approach. I start with food, but then I supplement to fill in the gaps. Here's an example. 70% of the US population has a low functional level of magnesium, for example. We just can't get it from the food we eat. So 7 out of 10 people need some magnesium supplementation. So I believe that there is a role for both healthy foods, which is always my first go-to, as well as adding additional supplementation. This goes for the gut health as well. So probiotic-rich foods are basically anything fermented. So from yogurts to kefirs to, for example, there's different soy products like miso soup. Like in Japan, they love miso soup. In Hawaii, where I've spent almost 3 decades, we love miso soup. It's a fermented soy. Tempeh is another example. Pickled vegetables is another example. Kimchi, sauerkraut. These are all things that are real food, but carries plenty of probiotics. A lot of us don't love a lot of these foods that I mentioned. So many of us can't get enough of these probiotics or the healthy strains of bacteria that we need. And so in that case, I think many people will benefit from taking a probiotic supplement, because many of us are lacking. And so I'm sort of in the middle. I believe in both the food first approach with supplementation to fill in the gaps. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but I'm kind of right in the middle of the camps.
No, that was a great answer. Hey, taking a quick break here to tell you about a podcast you should check out from our friend Justin Campbell. It's called the Fact Check This podcast. If you're fed up with fact checkers flagging everything as misinformation without actually backing it up, then you should definitely join Justin every Monday and Wednesday to fact check the fact checkers and to get the truth about what's going on in the world. Check it out everywhere podcasts are found. Fact Check This. So when people go out to look for, say a probiotic, what are like some, because you can get all kinds of different probiotics. You can get them at the grocery store. You can get them, online from Amazon. You can get these, very expensive probiotics from different outlets. What should people look for when they're looking for a probiotic? What are the most important things?
Yeah, so this is actually, an hour-long response. But to cut to the chase, you got to do what I do with my food, which is go for the quality stuff first. And when you're looking for a supplement, you got to go with a company that has a super strong sort of quality process, typically, because no supplement is quote unquote evaluated by the FDA or the Food and Drug Administration, which is what, evaluates our food, so to speak, and the pharmaceuticals. No supplement goes through FDA evaluation. So if anybody tells you that, hey, well, ours is approved by the FDA actually doesn't approve any supplements. They leave that to the consumer. And so you have to do a little bit of homework on your part to make sure the company that you're buying the probiotic from has good manufacturing process, or GMP. And a lot of them will have third-party validation. And most of the solid companies out there will state it right on the label. we follow good manufacturing process. We use third-party evaluation to basically say that what we say is in our supplement is actually in the supplement, and then you look for the absence or the lack of different, fillers and ingredients that should be in a chemistry lab and not in something that you swallow. So you want to look for natural ingredients. You want to look for something, generally speaking, that's GMO, that's plant-based, organic, that has what it says it has. So with respect to probiotics, like you said, there's so many out there, and there's some that are better than others. Some will say, oh, well, if it doesn't have to be refrigerated, then it can't be a good one. And that's totally not true. It depends on how they are processed, packaged, encapsulated, if they're freeze dried. There's a whole laundry list of things that I could talk about. But basically, you want to make sure it comes from a reputable company that uses good manufacturing process and that is third-party validated. That would be my starting point. And it's difficult to say, well, you need this many billion of this bacteria in this and this many billion in something else, because it's really I feel like it's really confusing to the consumer. So my recommendation is to usually talk with somebody, whether it be a physician, a natural health practitioner, somebody who's got experience in this area, because they're going to be able to kind of help you navigate this sort of Google, sea of information. I mean, you can find anything to prove anything you want on Google. So sometimes it's hard to sift through all the chaff to get through the good stuff, So there's definitely a lot of good companies out there, and they generally follow all the same standard rules, which is the good manufacturing, the third-party valuation, and that sort of thing. So
what would you say to somebody, say they go to their doctor and they want to start taking a probiotic, and we were talking about doctors before not being up on the research, and their doctor says, you don't need that, you need to waste your money on that. What would you advise somebody do? Should they find a new doctor? Where do they go from there?
Yeah, sometimes I would say that if your doctor or healthcare provider is not even willing to talk about, gut health or probiotics, then honestly, you may want to consider, working with a doctor who is willing to talk about that. And in general, if you look for somebody that is a, quote, functional medicine or integrative medicine doctor, they usually have a strong background in gut health, in, probiotics and supplements and things like that. And the traditional MD, honestly and sadly, doesn't get a lot of that training in medical school. And a lot of people don't know this. In a regular 4-year medical school, there is usually only about a 2-hour requirement for nutrition and that sort of thing. And the entire medical school curriculum. And nutrition, I would humbly submit, is probably the most important thing that you can take control of with respect to your own health to govern your health future, is literally your nutrition and what lies at the end of your fork. And most doctors have very, very little training, and it's really sad. It's not their fault because they didn't get to choose what they focused on in medical school. But if they don't choose to read and keep up with the current literature and research, that is their fault. And so if you have a doctor that's not even willing to talk about things like gut health and probiotics and supplements and things like that, if they're not even willing to talk about that, you should consider looking for a new doctor. And there's a great website called ifm.org, Institute of Functional Medicine.org. And you can find a doctor in almost any place, at least in the US. And I know there's a bunch throughout the world as well. So it's a good resource, ifm.org. So
I did not know that. And I'm currently looking for a functional medicine doctor. So that is good to know. Wow. Okay. So, well, let's just talk about it now. I was going to wait till the end. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about sugar, artificial sweeteners. Something that is super frustrating to me is, you go to the grocery store and you try to find like a healthy protein bar. And literally, you can't, everything either has sucralose in it or aspartame in it or corn syrup in it. You can't find it. It doesn't exist. And I'm not sure why, but it's almost impossible to find. So talk about like because I think there's a conception out there that, sugar's bad for you. And I think, to some degree it is a little bit of sugar. You need some sugar, but people just go to these artificial sweeteners, the diet drinks and things like that. What's the impact that they have on your gut?
Yeah, all of the artificial sweeteners, like a few of those that you mentioned, like sucralose, which is Splenda, or aspartame, which is like the one in Diet Coke, for example, NutraSweet. A lot of these have, chemical-based sweeteners which will wreck your gut bacteria. So this is one of my gut wreckers. It's basically artificial sweeteners, artificial flavorings, artificial colors, anything that says color number 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, like these are all artificial colors. If it says anything with, like I said, the chemical sweeteners like aspartame, sucralose, Splenda, these kinds of things, these will wreck your gut. But also, you could say that high fructose corn syrup is a natural sweetener. It's even a plant-based sweetener, but it's one of the worst sweeteners out there. High fructose corn syrup is one of the primary causes of what's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is now the most common cause for someone to need a liver transplant. It used to be alcohol. Now, this non-alcoholic fatty liver disease has overtaken alcohol in causing the worst liver disease, requiring transplant oftentimes. And it's basically caused by eating too much sugar, primarily in the form of high fructose corn syrup. So if you're looking for
and they put that stuff in baby formula,
almost
crazy,
everything.
yeah.
It's maddening. It is literally terrible for your body in many ways. But one is its effect on the liver, but also because it's so dang sweet. So it just makes you want to crave things that are very, very sweet. So I love that you mentioned sugar. It's literally the top of my list, right next to antibiotics, as things that wreck your gut. The more sugar you eat, the more the sort of bad actors, so to speak, will populate these bad gut bacteria, which are going to then signal your brain to want to eat more sugar. But to answer your question, all of the artificial sweeteners have this effect on the gut, as well as the artificial colorings, the artificial flavors, the artificial thickeners, these things called emulsifiers. I live by what I call the 5 ingredient rule. So if you're looking to buy let's say it's a protein bar, and if it has more than 5 ingredients, you should take pause and make sure you understand what all of those ingredients are. If they sound like they come from a chemistry lab and you have no idea what they're for, I would leave that granola bar on the shelf. Don't buy it. Like literally, make sure you know what's in your food. And the tricky thing here, John, is that there are 20 or more different names for both sugar, high fructose corn syrup. There's rice, brown rice syrup, and none of these are very good, to be honest. They all kind of cause similar responses. So it's a little tricky to navigate. And this is where you kind of have to go back to the real food, whole food kind of process that I talked about at the beginning. We seek food first, because anytime you buy something in a package, it's going to be suspect, not only for the artificial sweeteners, but for lots of other potential additives. And the one that I haven't even talked about is something that soybean oil would fit into this category, the seed oils. Most people have no idea that these are bad for them, and they're found in almost everything that comes in a package. Vegetable oil, soybean oil, corn oil, canola oil, even if it says organic canola oil, rice bran oil, rapeseed, sunflower, safflower. All of these oils are bad for you. They're literally causing significant inflammation in the body, and most people have no clue. And almost everything we eat that comes from a package has these oils. Like salad dressings are a terrible offender. Almost every granola bar out there has some kind of canola, soybean, some kind of oil in it, and most people have no idea that it's bad for them. And the reason it's bad is because it causes inflammation, and inflammation is literally the heart of illness. It's what causes most illness, is inflammation. So you got to go for the stuff that has the natural oils that don't require processing, like avocado oil, like coconut oil, like the classic, extra virgin olive oil that our Mediterranean neighbors are consuming. Like they use the quality oils, and we use the processed ones because they're cheap. They save money. So yeah, no, it's tough. You got to read the label. if you're looking for a sweetener that is not going to be really messing with the sugar balance in your body, something that comes from a natural plant, for example, stevia, monk fruit, these are sweet, but they don't cause the same kinds of blood sugar issues that high fructose corn syrup would. So I generally look for something that has either stevia or monk fruit. So honey, for example, is a good source of natural sugar if you use it sparingly. Like, I'm not recommending you dump bottles of this on your food or whatever, but like a couple of drops or a small drizzle of just natural honey. Honey actually has a lot of other beneficial properties besides the fact that it's just sweet, right? It has antibacterial properties. It has so-called phytochemicals and phytonutrients based upon what these bees are feeding off of. So I really like honey as a sweetener, as well as stevia and monk fruit. Those are kind of my go-tos. The sugar alcohols like erythritol, those are okay as well, but definitely steer clear of the high fructose corn syrup, the aspartames, the splendas, the sucralose, and they are everywhere, like you mentioned.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like you said, once you start reading labels, your mind will be blown. I mean, it's the stuff that doesn't even make any sense. Let's now talk about the gut-brain axis. That's something that, we hear, or at least I hear a lot about. I don't know how widely known it is, but I think it's starting to get to the point that people are starting to understand that, things like anxiety and, are tied potentially to things going on in your gut. So can you talk about how the gut-brain axis works? And I'm sure you probably have dedicated an entire podcast to this, but at a high level, give us some of the inner workings.
Yeah, so absolutely. And this is something I would say that is relatively new. Maybe the last decade, this research is really coming out, showing that your gut health, the bacteria that live in your intestinal tract, really affects a lot of your emotional health. So like you said, if you suffer from anxiety or depression or PTSD, a lot of these kind of what I like to call brain health issues, the common medical person would call it mental health. I just think that mental health has some kind of a negative connotation, so I don't love it. But a lot of these conditions do have not only a root in the gut, but they can also be dramatically changed and positively influenced by working on getting your gut healthy. On the flip side, they can get worse if your gut is unhealthy. So there is this thing called the gut-brain axis, and it's basically a whole communication network that connects the brain with your gut or your intestinal tract. The primary nerve is called the vagus nerve. It's VAGUS. And what goes down the vagus and goes back up the vagus does not stay in vagus. This nerve literally connects with your whole entire body. One thing that people have started to share is that serotonin, which is that sort of happy hormone, that neurotransmitter that we, hear about in the brain because there's a lot of pharmacological, treatments or medications that are supposed to raise serotonin in the brain, for example, to treat things like depression. Well, it turns out that 95% of all the serotonin in your body is actually in your gut. 95%.
That's
so
amazing.
way more of it than is in the brain. And what happens in the gut, like I said, this nerve called the vagus nerve does not stay in the vagus nerve. It goes back up to the brain. So the serotonin that is produced in your gut by the healthy cells can literally elevate your mood, because that neurotransmitter, that happy hormone, will go to the brain and affect its job is to help you to feel good. And they've found this not only in just serotonin, but also in dopamine, in adrenaline, a lot of these other what are called either neurotransmitters, neuropeptides, hormones. A lot of these have basis in your gut. So what's cool is they've studied, for example, people that don't have, for example, maybe some of these brain health issues. They don't have anxiety, they don't have depression, and they compare the gut bacteria that they have compared to somebody who does have either anxiety, depression, bipolar, a lot of these conditions, and they find that their makeup in their gut is very different. And like you said at the outset, these people literally could be treated with a fecal transplant or a stool transplant from somebody that has a different gut bacterial makeup, and that could actually get them better. Or they could be treated by just changing a few things about their diet, by reducing or stopping most of their processed foods. Processed foods are one of the biggest offenders, that cause unhealthy gut. And these are not only things with just sugar in it, or the high fructose corn syrup, or the processed flours, grains, etc., but they have those other offenders like we talked about, the artificial ingredients, the seed oils, all these kinds of things. And so the first priority is just to change your diet. And so what they have found is when you eat real whole foods, they lean towards growing the population of healthy bacteria. Specifically, one that's been studied recently is called Akkermansia. And that's been shown to improve not only your gut health, but your brain or mental health. So oftentimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this, I know I've seen it in dozens and dozens of people, including my own family members, that when they got their gut healthy, some of their issues like anxiety, like depression have literally just melted away. Yeah. And the cool part is this is a natural thing, right? You can change this by your diet, by adding a probiotic supplement, for example, without having to take a pharmaceutical, which most of these medications that have been approved for treatment of depression, for example, have about a 30% efficacy rate at best. So this is basically about the same as a placebo. A placebo has,
and there's all the side effects too, potential side effects.
Yeah, and then you have tons of side effects. So besides just diet, other things affect the gut and the health of the gut. Things like getting appropriate sleep, getting daily movement or exercise, decreasing your stress levels. All of these also affect the populations of the gut. And so if you are doing these healthy practices, and in my book I detail 5 basic practices, which are exactly those: food first, exercise, stress optimization, proper sleep. And then the 5th one is right here, gut health. So if you optimize those 5 things, you can not only prevent so much disease, but you can reduce the chances that you will get a lot of these common things like anxiety, depression, all these sort of brain health or mental health challenges. So it all feeds back to the gut. It's actually super fascinating.
Well, that is awesome. And I know you have a hard stop coming up, so I want to let you go. But before that, I want to give you a chance, plug everything, plug your podcast, the book, website, social medias, all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, thanks for the opportunity. So yeah, my main avenues are, for example, on Instagram, my podcast. You can look for me at Modern Medicine Movement. Also, my regular Instagram is at Aloha, the Hawaiian word ALOHA, surf, SURF, and then doc, DOC. Aloha Surf Doc, because I'm from Hawaii and I love to surf, and I love all things health. So Aloha Surf Doc, Modern Medicine Movement. My website is modernmedicinemovement.com. I also have, if you just click, the easiest place to find me is just on either of those Instagram accounts at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement. If you click on the link tree, you'll see links to my website. You'll see links to, I have a free weekly newsletter that has health pearls that go out once a week, usually on a Thursday. My podcast generally comes out on a Thursday. I have one coming out, in just a couple of days that I think you guys will love. It's something that actually one of my own, I have a group now called the Thrive Community, which is kind of like a VIP access group where I do separate trainings. I do live Zoom calls. I give them more of me, more of my time, more of my attention. And that's a paid community. So you can also find links to that as well. But I'll offer your audience, if they sign up for that, I'll give them one of my free health courses. I have about 7 different health courses. One is on gut health, actually.
Awesome.
They can all be linked up on my Instagram at Aloha Surf Doc or at Modern Medicine Movement. But at a minimum, please follow me there. Sign up for my free newsletter. I have tons of free content. I love to help people. I love to share this important, literally life-changing information that honestly is simple. It's not difficult. It's not challenging, but it can literally change your life. So thanks so much for having me on, John. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for being so generous with your time. And I just want to reinforce and encourage people to check out Dr. Hemingway's podcast and his book and all that stuff, because it is It's high quality content. It's good stuff. So I'll link to all that stuff on my show notes page as well. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, I appreciate that. One, I forgot to really talk about the book, but the website is thepreventablebook.com, and that should be live this week. I actually went over some final changes with my website person, and so that should be live this week. And the book's supposed to be due August 2022. So just this summer, the book is coming out. Preventable, 5 powerful practices to avoid disease and build unshakable health. I'd love for you guys to grab a copy of that. So make sure to check that out as well.
That's exciting. This is your first book, right?
Absolutely. My first official book. It'll be the first of many. I actually have a second book in the works and a third and fourth in my mind. And I just love sharing good, high quality information. Sometimes it's so hard to sift through all the weeds out there. So I can't wait to get this out to you guys. That's
cool. I'll definitely pick it up. Thanks again for coming on the show. Hope you enjoyed another great interview on Finding Freedom today. I hope you're also enjoying the shift that I've made on this show, bringing on different types of guests with backgrounds in health and wellness. And we'll be talking to experts in finance and business and entrepreneurship. And I'm really looking forward to digging into these areas like today's episode, where there's really going to be things where tactically you can apply things that you learn during these shows into your life. That is really my goal going forward. Harry Brown wrote a book, How I Found Freedom in an Unfree World. And the way that we're going to find freedom in this world, I don't think is through going to the ballot box. We find freedom right here in our daily lives by creating and maximizing and expanding the freedom that is available to us. We can't wait for someone to grant us freedom. And a big part of our freedom is taking care of our own bodies and our health. So we are not held back by the limitations that we've put on our bodies by ingesting bad foods and not eating the right thing, that we're not able to live to our fullest potential. But it's important that we take care of our bodies and we maximize our lifespan, our lifetime, and our health throughout that time so we can get the most out of life. I think that is definitely a principle of being a free person. So if you're enjoying these episodes, please, at the very least, give me a 5-star rating and a nice review on the old podcast app, either on the Finding Freedom podcast feed or on the Lions of Liberty Network feed, wherever you listen. And if you love the show, and if you haven't joined the Lions of Liberty Pride yet, you can learn more about what it is. Basically, you get bonus content, you get community, you get a lot of great stuff. We really do spoil our Lions of Liberty Pride members. So you can check that out at patreon.com/lionsliberty or lionsofliberty.locals.com to get more information. That's all I got for today. Have a great weekend. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.